understanding synchronous and asynchronous code in JavaScript and what we need to do there for better performance. Now, let's gain an understanding of the differences between synchronous and asynchronous code. So with synchronous code, it executes code line by line, and it's going to wait for each operation to complete before it moves on to the next operation. Now with asynchronous code, it's going to allow other operations to continue before the current operation completes. And so if you have a long running operation, other operations can go ahead and start. And so you'll have multiple operations running in parallel. And this will enhance the performance, especially when you have I/O operations. Now let's take a look at some synchronous operations that are common in web applications. And these are what we want to look for and look at potentially converting them over to asynchronous operations or even using something called a promise. And by looking for these, this is where we can look for improving performance of our JavaScript web application. So the first one is network requests. So these are HTTP or HTTPS calls. And so these are calls that are basically going out and talking across the network. And these can be intensive. And so you also could have many of these. So if we can run these in an asynchronous way so that they're running in parallel, we can get more done and have better performance. File system operations, very similar. So sometimes you might have an application that's actually reading and writing from a file system. And again, if you can have that running in an asynchronous way so that multiple operations can run, you're going to have better performance. Database queries. So again, reading and writing from a database. And that's another good one to move over to asynchronous. And then long computations. So this could be a number of different things. But again, this is another good one to kind of look at to see if you can convert it over to asynchronous. So one of the things that we do or can do is we can convert our synchronous functions over to asynchronous functions, or we can convert them over to promises. Now, a promise in JavaScript is simply an object that's going to represent the eventual completion or failure of an asynchronous operation, and it's going to give you the resulting value. Now, promises are a powerful feature within JavaScript, and they're good for handling asynchronous operations. Promises provide a much cleaner and much more manageable way to deal with the operations that take time to complete. So if you have multiple operations running in asynchronous, promises are going to help you in a more graceful and manageable way handle those multiple operations. Now we're going to look at refactoring some code. So we're going to refactor some synchronous code to async, and we're going to use a promise and await in our code. So let's take a look at it here. So for our synchronous code, it's very, very simple. It's just a straightforward function that's going to process some data. And on the other side, we change it to an async function. I'm going to go ahead and build all the code here so we can just talk through it. And basically, we've changed our process data function to an async function. And then we have a promise creation inside of a try block with a new promise. And then we have an executor function. The executor function passed to the promise constructor runs immediately to go ahead and simulate an asynchronous operation. And then we also have the ability there to simulate the operation and the success and failure of that. So you can see that in the code there with the success or fail value. And then that will resolve or reject. And so we also have an await the promise, and the await keyword there in the code is going to pause the execution of the process data function until the promise is resolved or rejected. Now, towards the end of the code there, we're logging the result, right? We're logging if the promise is resolved, then it's going to result in a success that will be logged out to the console. And if there's an error with the catch block, then we're gonna push out an error to the console. And so that's just an example to contrast some synchronous and asynchronous code, so you could see what refactoring might look like when you go to refactor from synchronous code to asynchronous. Now let's look at how we can improve our responsiveness and reduce timeouts of our JavaScript web applications through various optimizations. First up, we're going to look at how we can improve responsiveness. So these are 3 actions that you can take to improve the responsiveness. The first one is throttling JavaScript code. Now, with throttling, we basically ensure that a function is called at most one time in a specified time period. And this is useful for handling events like resizing of windows, if there's scrolling being done in your web application, input field changes, and more. The next one is debouncing JavaScript code. And this is really about controlling the rate at which your functions are executed, right? So you're delaying the execution of a function for a certain amount of time, and then you're delaying the execution of a function until a certain amount of time has passed. The next one is reducing activity in loops. And this is all about minimizing the time a main thread is blocked. And this will allow your JavaScript web apps to handle other critical tasks like rendering the rest of the page or user actions and doing these things more efficiently. Now you can achieve this by doing a few things like optimizing your loop logic, minimizing your DOM manipulations, and making sure that you're using efficient data structures. Now let's explore reducing timeouts in JavaScript. So the first thing you can do is basically utilize caching. So this is basically storing anything that's frequently accessed, whether it's data, even images, in temporary storage. So that could be cached locally with your users, or it could be cached somewhere else, or you could even use like a CDN network to have those files or images cached local to where your users are. And this reduces those load times. So it's going to help your website and all the content and everything load much faster. And we've already talked about caching a little bit in this course, but it's really important to bring it up again because this does help reduce those timeouts. Now, it improves performance because you're accessing that cached data much faster than you can retrieve it from the database or the server. The next one is limiting library dependencies. And this is all about minimizing the number of external libraries that your JavaScript code has to go out there and talk to. You basically want to utilize the essential ones only. So this really helps by decreasing the load time. You have fewer dependencies and fewer files that you need to download or execute, and resulting in quicker load time. And this is reducing code complexity as well, and it simplifies your code base by limiting those dependencies and making things run faster and easier for you and other developers to maintain from a code perspective. Here are some more actions that you can take to reduce timeouts in JavaScript. So the next one is delaying JavaScript loading. And what this is you're either deferring loading those scripts or you're using asynchronous scripts and code within your JavaScript web app. So we've talked about asynchronous code already, and this is just kind of going back to that. What you're doing here is you're ensuring that the most critical parts of your web app are loading first. And this is improving that page load time. You're loading that essential content, the things that need to come up right away and need to be there for your users to see the core parts of your web app right away. And so this is going to just improve that load time overall. It's going to improve the speed and efficiency of your website, and it's going to help render the page and minimize the time that your users have to sit there and wait for it. The next one is using file compression. And we've talked about file compression a little bit already, but it's really good to revisit this because it is core in reducing timeouts. And so again, this is reducing the size of the files that are sent over the network. And so this also can improve and reduce network congestion, which also can improve performance as well. And there's many methods and tools out there to help you compress your files with your JavaScript web app. Now, this is going to give you faster downloads. It's going to take just less time overall to load your JavaScript website, pages, and files if you have files that are being loaded. And again, it's going to reduce the bandwidth. And so that in turn is going to speed up things on your web app. And this will also make your web app more efficient for any users that are using slow internet connections or maybe have limited data plans. So that wraps up the reducing timeouts as well as increasing the responsiveness in your JavaScript web app. Now we're going to dive into our demo where we're going to look at caching objects to reduce timeouts in JavaScript. All right, I have a web app open here, and it's a small JavaScript web app that I put together just to test and show you how caching would work. And we're going to explore that using the developer tools inside of Chrome. So I'm going to open the developer tools by going to More Tools and then Developer Tools. You could also do this by clicking or pressing on Control-Shift-I on your keyboard. So in here, I'm on the Application tab, and it already picked up the website that I'm on. So it has that here, and then it has local storage that I have expanded here under storage, and it has my URL here. Now you could see that it says data loaded from cache. That's because I already accessed this website. But let me go ahead and clear this, and then I'm going to reload the website by just right-clicking in the web app itself, and then I'm going to click on reload. And there you can see in the console window down here, it says fetching data from server. And so you can see that it added a value in here as well. And so I'm just going to right-click out here and click reload again. And you can see here that it says data loaded from cache. Now, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go over to my network tab, and actually let me go back to my application tab, and I'm going to clear this, and then I'm going to go over to my network tab. And then over here, I'm going to click reload, and you can see that it fetched the data from the server itself, and it's just returning some generic JSON information from an API. But I want you to pay attention here to the main section of the developer tools here, and you can see the calls that it made when I reloaded the web app. And you can see here this one and this fetch, and you can see the size and the time that it took. So 33 milliseconds, okay? And if I reload this again, you can see that the data loaded from cache. And you can see we don't have an extra network HTTP call, and we shaved off 33 milliseconds of time for loading this web app. And so that's where you can see a real world example of how caching can actually start to reduce the time that it takes for your site to load, and it makes your site more responsive and much faster. Now, that was one thing, one object on my web app. Imagine if you have a full-blown web app and you have a lot of data that's being loaded from a server or something like a database or an external library. That could really start to add up and impact your performance. And so by caching as much as we possibly can, we start to remove those network calls and that time that it takes to load those objects on your web app. So that brings us to the end of this demo. I hope that was a good example just to show you how caching objects in JavaScript can improve the responsiveness as well as reduce timeouts.